All right, welcome to the Australian Lawn and Garden Podcast. In today's episode, we've got Joel from the Landscaping Podcast. So it is like Inception, isn't it? Like a podcast within a podcast within a podcast. But I love having different guests from the industry. And we were just saying before, and what I'm excited to learn is you've done so many episodes with people who know so many things that I'm just completely clueless on, because you're about landscaping and that's what the podcast is about. I'm in the maintenance world, and a lot of people who are casually looking from the outside would go, well, they're the same thing. And it's like, they are so not the same thing. They're so different. So I'm really curious about this, and I love what you do. So thanks for coming on the podcast.
Thank you very much for having me. I've listened to quite a few of your episodes and absolutely love what you do and how educational it is. So it's made me want to improve my game, because I just chat to people like a normal conversation, but I found you seem to get a lot of good questions into your guests. So hopefully this one helps some people as well.
Yeah, well, thanks. I mean, you would know. I mean, how many episodes have you done now?
132 came out today.
Crazy. That's a lot. I think you're episode 25, something like that, on the podcast so far. So 132. Are many double ups in that? People you've had on a couple of times, or?
Only one kind of. Oh, there's two that kind of are. They're not sort of talking to the same person, but those people interviewed me. Like one was in a home show, and one was just a guest host.
So you've talked to 130 people in the.
I've done. I do some Q&As as well, so I've done 20.
Right. Yes. Yeah. I've seen those
of them. So there's 20. Yeah. So I've done more than 100 guests.
100 guests. So let's be very respectful here, but you've interviewed people who were geniuses and people who you probably thought were geniuses, and then probably they weren't so smart, right? Like, has there ever been? Well, let's start from this. Who is the person who's blown you away the most, who you've interviewed, and you were like, man, this person is just way more switched on than I ever thought they were? You know.
There were two. Like, I don't have any preconceived ideas on their intelligence or anything like that, but there's been two people who I interviewed who I had no idea how massive their businesses were. I knew they had decent sized businesses, but there was Tim Davies, who's in WA actually. Yes. So you probably would have heard of him. And Brooke Goodwin from Brooks Blooms in Brisbane. Both of them have got over 100 staff, which just blows my mind. Like, I would have thought they'd have at least 20, but then when I found out they got over 100, it blows my mind, because I struggled to look after more than 3 at a time, let alone having that many. It's
insane. Like, Tim Davies here, they're one of the biggest. They would have over 200, I think. I mean, I don't know. I'm not in that. I don't do what they do, so we don't really, cross paths too much. But yeah, they're huge, and they still have. One of the things that they've done, which is really, really even more challenging, is that it's easier to build a business based on mediocre work that sort of appeals to the masses, and just be slightly above average and competitive on price. But they still do amazing, high quality, like high-end landscaping jobs. So it's just a level of complexity in that as well. What did you notice about those two people that perhaps might have been a bit different with those sizes of businesses compared to the average Joe that you interview who might have 1 or 10 employees in that ballpark?
Oh, I found it interesting with Tim. So he's been in business for 40 years, I think he said, or close to. And he had only just recently, like within the last few years, got a business coach for the first time. So, you would think someone who's got that many employees and has been doing it for that long, surely they don't need a business coach. But the fact that he did, and he strongly recommended other people to do it, obviously didn't think, I'm not smart enough to have actually got myself a business coach, but I did think that it probably would be a good idea if someone like him is doing it as well.
Well, I've done 2 episodes with my business coach, Darren, and it's a lot less. Now, Darren and I are a bit different, but from the average business coach arrangement. But it's less. It's not like what people expect. I don't think people expect it to be very serious. And what I found with Darren is a lot of it is I need someone to bounce ideas off, who can tell me when I'm being a bit of an idiot, and who still knows my negative tendencies. Like, I'm very optimistic, I'm very driven, and so that means I'm the sort of person who would run down a wrong path too long, rather than someone who would never go down a good path. I need that sort of person. Yeah. But how long have you been in business though?
So I started as an employee of the business and then took over the business in 2009. So I started, I think, in 2006 and then finished my apprenticeship and qualified for a year or two and then took over the business 2009. So I was in November, so coming up to 14 years later this year.
And what do you, because that's the other thing as well, is that like if you've been in business, I think anyone who's been in business for more than 3 years is actually quite intelligent. They're quite smart. They've done something that very few people actually achieve. So what's that, 15, 14, 13 years or something like that you've been doing it? And then you interview 100 people, you probably got a lot more smarts than you let out, I think.
Well, like you said, in terms of your coach sort of give you advice on, so you don't head down the wrong path. Like I don't have a coach who stops me from doing that. So I'm constantly heading down the wrong path and learning from my own mistakes. So yeah, there's one thing about being in business, but actually being profitable is a completely different thing.
Oh man.
And I'm still yet to master that. So I've still got a lot of work to do. And it doesn't help when with all the prices going up and every single thing that you buy these days.
So what do you specifically do now? Because it sounds like things have adapted and changed over time from when you took over in 2009. But maybe for the people who've never heard of you, never listened to your podcast, what do you do on a day-to-day basis that's not the podcast?
We do landscape construction. So whenever people tell them, like when I say I'm a landscaper, they say, "Oh, I'll get you to come around and mow my lawn." I'll point out to them that we actually need a building license to do what we do. So it's like you said, it's a completely different industry almost, even though it's under the same umbrella. But it hasn't changed almost at all since I started. So I still do everything on site, and then just try and squeeze in all the office work outside of that. Which is a bit of always a constant battle. Like ideally, I'd like to have 2 days on site or 3 days on site and 2 days in the office, or at least 1 day in the office a week. But I'm horrendous at scheduling things, and always the timelines always change on projects and things happen, which always makes me move things around. So I'm just constantly juggling different balls and going to different places. And whenever someone asks me when I can start their project, I just tell them I've got no idea. It'll just be whenever we've finished the other ones. I'll tell them the day before because I just don't know myself, so there's no point guessing. So I still do all the quotes and then do everything on site. We've just at the start of this year, I put on a landscape architect, so we do designs as well as construction.
Yep.
So she's been doing awesome early on. So ideally, I'd like to also have a role in the design side of things, but at the moment, she's been doing the designs completely herself. But it's working out pretty well. But because we've got so much work booked in, it takes a long time for us to start building those designs. So we haven't actually built any of the ones that she's designed yet. But once they do, they're pretty awesome designs. So they'll start to generate more work as well. So yeah, basically design and construction business. But it really hasn't changed that much in 14 years, other than the quality of the work that we do. Like we work in a high end market. I probably 5 years ago, our average project would have been about 25 grand, and now it'd be more than 150 grand.
Right. So you mentioned about being profitable, right? One thing that's a red flag going through my head in terms of just the business thing is and I don't know how to manage this, right? I'm clueless. So tell me, like you would book in and quote a job, and then how long between when you quote to when you do it?
Yeah, so right? It averages about 9 months, I reckon.
So, and then inflation and everything that's happened in the last 3 years. So, I mean, that would be so tough. And I've got a friend who is a builder, right? And so I've heard just some stories with him, and not in landscaping at all, but man, like how do you balance charging a profitable amount and then not just completely pricing yourself out of the market?
So until the last 2 or 3 years, it hasn't been a problem, but that's been a massive problem in the last 2 or 3 years, which is exactly why businesses are going out of business. Like massive ones who have been in business for 50 plus years Now is easily the most difficult time to have ever run a business in the construction industry, which is ironic because there's so much work, but it's
Yes.
also the most expensive time to do work, and there's the least amount of employees to be able to find as well to
Oh my
help you
goodness, yes.
with the amount. So it's such a crazy time to be alive and working in the industry, but I'm excited about that. But yeah, I've had massive losses the last couple of years, so yeah, it's just swings and roundabouts. A way, so you just sort of need to adapt. Like again, if I had had a business coach, they might have been able to foresee what was happening and said, make sure you're not locking in these projects you don't really need to, because there's no reason for you to have to lock in projects so far in advance if you're that in demand. You can make them wait
Yes, I
till
get what
you're
you mean.
ready to sign the contract. So you give them a quote saying this is what it is at the moment. If the price, like I don't know if the price is going to go up or down, but we can reassess it, a month or two before we start, and you can lock in the contract then. But because we have to have contracts for all the projects that we do, you can't change that once they've signed it. And that's what a lot of the volume builders have got themselves into trouble with as well, because they're the same. So once they've signed the contract, you're locked in at that price.
Yeah. And essentially their business model is economy. Those, what you said, the volume builders, there is economies of scale, right? So they can be competitive on price because they do so many jobs. And so they get into this vicious cycle where you have to sign the jobs. You have to do a certain number of jobs just to cover expenses. It would have taken you a while, by the sounds of it, to get to a point, like you're saying 5 years ago, where you started doing the more luxury stuff. Was that just something that came with age, like at the age of the business and reputation and slowly building over time? Or was that something that you literally stopped, turned around, changed the direction of your business, really made an active move to head to that sort of stuff?
Yep, literally stopped and I decided that's the projects that I wanted to work on. So in 2011, my first child was born. So she was 6 months old in June, and we had our biggest job that we'd ever done. It was 100 grand, middle of winter. So that was going to keep us busy for probably 3 months. So I'd been knocking back heaps of work because that one was coming up. And then that guy pulled the pin like a week or two before we were about to start, and I hadn't charged him a deposit, which I usually did, but I didn't do it for him for some reason. So then, I've got a 6-month-old daughter, no work, but we ended up getting work because I know I've always had a lot of contact. So I just contacted people I know, said, let me know if you need anything, and had our own work as well that came in pretty quickly. But I got a bit scared about working for myself at that time with a young family, so I decided to go and work at the Commonwealth Bank for a while. So I stopped landscaping. I was doing it on weekends and days off. And then I was at the bank for 2.5 years while doing landscaping still on weekends and days off the whole time. And then so I was there 2.5 years until 2015. And then decided, because I worked my way up into business banking and I was seeing people coming in who were running their own business and they were making okay money. So I thought I can do this again because I loved landscaping. And then had a different mindset of, because initially I would just take on any job that came along. I'd say yes to everything. Didn't have no goals at all. I'd just gone from working for someone else to working for myself and just saying yes to everything and having no vision at all. So then 2015, I decided I wanted to work in the high-end market. I knew that we did the quality of work that we did was good enough. You just need to get those projects and then advertise, like do a good job of it. And then you can sort of advertise and it just sort of, builds up from there. So, because we're in Geelong, which is an hour south of Melbourne, so it's like the biggest regional place in Victoria. We've got a population of about 250,000. So what I wanted, because all the big designers are all in Melbourne, so I wanted whenever they think of Geelong, that they think of us. So I started going to all like landscape and Victoria meetings and just sort of getting our name out there as much as possible. We did builds at the Melbourne International Flower and Garden Show. Got on the block and did a couple of landscaping weeks on that over a couple of years. So I was just sort of putting ourselves out there so that everyone knew that we existed. And then when you get those projects, you do an awesome job. I quoted the first couple pretty cheap so that I could get them. So I didn't make any money on the first couple, but that's just marketing. So then it gradually built up, and then and now I could have probably 10 or 15 guys on with the amount of work we knock back, and all high end stuff as well.
So this is the thing that's going to shock people. The first thing is that, and we've just glazed over it. The first thing is that you people feel like just things will just happen. If I go long enough in business, eventually we'll start getting the right sort of stuff. Things will eventually come along. And it took deliberate action and moves from you to head in that direction. But the other thing is, you're talking about, and very honestly, struggling with finances, which anyone who's been in business for a while has struggled with before. And yet you're knocking back all this work. And so there's so many aspects to business that are so complicated, and you have to be really active in them, and you have to move in them. And if you just float down the stream, you're going to end up where everybody else is floating down the stream, which is in the same place, And so some people will be listening to this early on in business. That's for people who've been in business a while. They're like, yeah, man, I relate. I totally understand. And then you guys are like, what? Like what? You have to, it's more work than I thought,
Yeah, like it's easy to say things like, hey, you should do them when you've got experience and you've gone through all the tougher times, and you can start to, when you get into the era we're at now, where we can pick and choose jobs. So it's a lot easier to say I should have done that earlier. But there are times where you do have to take on shit jobs that you don't want to do.
Yeah,
but
100%.
As soon as you can say no to them, and it's good if you can say no, because if you're doing a project that you shouldn't be doing, you could be missing out on another one that is the type of job you've been looking for.
Yeah,
it's a real balance though, because you don't want to be without work. So it's certainly not easy. And like you said, we gloss over it, but I don't want it to sound like it's a piece of cake and everyone should do it exactly the same way. But it's good to have, like, you should have some sort of goal, some sort of vision that you want to work towards, especially within landscaping and even maintenance as well. Like maintenance, you don't want to work on every single job that comes along. Like if you want to be just doing topiary hedging, you don't want to be doing acreage lawn mowing if that job comes along, because that'll take you away from the projects that you want to work on.
Do you know, when I first started my business, all I really did was mowing lawns. Like, I think a lot of people are just like that. Mowing lawns, basic mulching stuff, things like that. That gets tiring pretty quickly. At least that was what my experience was. And the reality is that when I changed my model from being something that just did lawn mowing to just did basic gardening services to somebody who could identify and solve issues and do product applications, two things happened. One, I made a lot more money per hour. Clients are much more willing to pay higher money for weed control, fungicide applications, fertilization, all that sort of stuff. They see it as a more technical, rightly so, more technical and thus more valuable service. So way higher hourly rates when doing those services. The second thing that happened is it reinvigorated my passion for the industry, because I went from somebody who was just doing lowly mowing jobs, seen as a low life in society by some, others not. But yeah, you know what it's like if you're in business, to somebody who could solve people's problems, to somebody who could actually help them get a beautiful place to live. And I went back to really, really enjoying my job again. What's really cool is that we have a sponsor that literally sells every single product that I have used and use right now in my lawn care packages for my clients. And I'm honored to have them as a sponsor, because the Lawn Shed, which is the sponsor, they're backed by and a partner business to the Living Turf, which is Australia's largest lawn product supplier. The thing about this, though, is that the Lawn Shed has a trade login, and they have literally designed their website and their service around small businesses. I don't know of any other business that is literally dedicated solely to small businesses. And the thing that is really great is, some of you might be listening to this going, I don't know how to do product applications. That's way too technical. They've got expert advice, people who are actually willing to answer your questions. And what you will find is you're going to learn very quickly, going and buying a couple of bags of fertilizers, asking for some advice, applying it on your own lawn, testing it out on some friends, seeing the results, getting the confidence from that. Same with all the other products that they could sell. That's exactly what I did, honestly. Tried it on family, tried it on my own lawn, got experience with it, asked people to use it before, went out and used it, got those amazing results. And that was the start of me turning my business from something that was, making money, but I didn't really love it, to something that was making great money. And I really did enjoy it. If you go on the Lawn Shed, and this sounds like something that's going to help your business, Sign up to their trade account because there's some products that you won't see on the normal account. They only provide it to small businesses. Through the trade account, they will prioritize you as a small business compared to other people or other businesses out there. And if you go and sign up, say that you heard us from the Australian Lawn and Garden podcast, and that will support us as a podcast. I genuinely am glad to have that as a partner, because the reality is that it's a true story, close to my heart, and it is genuinely something I believe in, not just a cash grab like some other sponsorships might have been. So jump on them, the Lawn Shed, the trade section, jump there. Let's get back into the podcast. In the maintenance industry, I would think it would be easier to transition to high quality stuff, because if you have a client, like the thing about landscaping is it's feast and famine. If you have a nice job, you get a massive amount of money in, but if there's nothing after that, no one books after that, it's like you got no work, right? Whereas with gardening, it's like, well, I've got maintenance side of the gardening, because it's both gardening, but the maintenance side is like you've got these regular jobs, and you can transition slowly by every new client you take on. Maybe you up your hourly rate and you drop the bottom one, and you take on a new one at a hourly rate and you drop the bottom one, and you can slowly transition like that. But it sounds like in landscaping, you just got to pull the button, and it's pull the pin, press the button, like commit, send it, jump, and that's going to be stressful. Like,
not for me, it's not, no, because we've always had heaps of work, and because we're a small company, so it would be more stressful for larger companies who have got more staff, because they have to take on jobs that they don't want to do because they've got to feed the beast. Whereas I've only got 2 employees, or 3 employees, including the designer. So I don't have. So we'll do a job, and like I said, they're 150 grand, and they like a 150 grand project will take us probably 6 to 8 weeks. So you'd get one of them, and there's 2 months of work for 3 people. So you don't do a lot of jobs in a year. So that's why, like, when you tell people like how busy we are, they say, "Oh, that sounds good." And I said, "Yeah, well, you think it's good, but it can also be more stressful having the work on than having no work at all." If I had no work, I could ring 50 people and get work from them, like overflow work, or go work for them. But if I've got all this work I've got to do, there's nothing I can do other than actually get that work done, and people are waiting for their project to get done. So it's it can be stressful both ways, having too much work and as well as not having any at all.
How do you quote these things? I'm so clueless, right? How do you quote? Because I'm used to just going to a job. I mean, we quote large commercial stuff, right? But it's really, even if you have say like the biggest job that we've ever done is a property that had 200, like a retirement village with just about 200 houses, or 196 or something, whatever it was, common areas, all that sort of stuff. There was like 700 roses, and there was, a lot of huge amounts of hedging, like massive amounts of work, right? But at its core, it's the same thing. You're doing it 15 times, and you're doing this other thing 4 times. Like you fertilized this many times, and if you fertilized one house, you fertilized 200 houses. You know how to do that. So, but it seems like with landscaping, because you got the whole product stuff that you talked about, inflation going up, right? And then you've got weather that could completely stop you from doing anything. Whereas with garden maintenance, it's not so bad, right? Like if the soil is wet, I can still cut hedges. Maybe I can't mow the lawn, but I'll switch some services around. But you might just be sitting there for a week waiting for something to dry out, especially with crazy rain, and then you got product, you've got people, you've got so many moving parts. You might start digging a trench and find a massive rock, and like subcontractors you rely on. That seems like so technical. So like, how do you quote that? Like, I mean, that's a massive question. Probably take you an hour to explain. But like, I mean, how do you do it? Like, it's a massive job for me, from my perspective, at least.
Yeah, it's one of the things you get better with experience. But yeah, I could not hate winter any more than I do. It's the worst. Like, you can have 0.4 of a millimeter of rain, and that just turns your job into a slushy mess. And then you got to clean it. You spend an hour at the end of the day cleaning up all the mud and all your tools, and it's just couldn't hate it any more than I do. But luckily, we're in Victoria. We get, I think, 300 mil of rain a year, which is not much at all. And then in New South Wales last year, I think they had 2 or 3 meters of rain.
Yes.
Like they just had, it was just a nightmare for them. So, it could be a lot worse than what we have it. But in terms of quoting it, like the episode that you did, like I listened to it as a podcast, but it would obviously be better to watch it at YouTube. But where you spoke about working out your hourly rate and all the things you need to include, and that you don't work every day of the year or every day of the week. That is one of the best podcast episodes I've listened to explain that. And that's something I talk to people about a lot. Like I work out, and my first boss taught me. So he worked out, you work out all your costs and what you want to pay and everything like that over the year, and fuel, and make sure you got profit included in that as well. And then divided by 220, and that's how much you need to charge per day. So then you can divide that by per person. Yes. Like I don't get too detailed by saying, an apprentice is this much an hour and I'm this much an hour. I have everyone is the same. It's just, it all sort of works out okay in the end. But you've just basically got to work out all your expenses to work out what your proper hourly rate is. And then you know how long it takes you to lay a square metre of paving. So if you've got, or how many you do in a day. So you just sort of break it down like that. And job tracking is really important with helping with that as well. So that if you think you're going to lay 14 square metres a day, and then you just keep quoting that for all your jobs, but then if you actually stopped and worked it out, you're only laying 7 square metres a day, you need to know that you're quoting too high. So it's something that you start off small because the jobs you're working on are small. You just need to keep an idea on how much time you're spending on a job, and see how much your quote matches up with the actual figures of the job, and then change like that. So I don't have any apps or anything that I use, but it's good if you do have an app so you can actually compare the two hourly rate, or compare the two rates that you're actually getting stuff done in. So then you can fine tune your quoting that way.
Like a timing app, so like you clock on and clock out of the job, so you can see how long you do there on site.
Yeah, some people I've had on the podcast, that's what their employees do. So if they're laying bricks for the morning, they'll say that they'll have their time app saying that they're laying bricks for this many hours, and then the next part of the day they're putting plants in or doing paving. So that way they really target exactly how much they're spending on each different project.
Yeah.
Whereas mine, I just do, they were at this job for the day, and that, it's a lot more generic. So I don't look into it as much. But it's a good thing to do, because if you're doing, you might make, a lot of money on the excavation part of the project, but lose money on the drainage part of the project. So on the next project, if you're only doing drainage and not excavation for some reason, you'll lose money because you made money on that previous job, but it was because of a different part of it.
You killed it on one aspect, and you lost on the other, and might come out the wash. And the less deliberate you are in measuring those things, the less you're going to know.
So, and you don't need to do it on every job, because it takes a lot of work to do that. But like maybe every 4 jobs do it, so that then you can see how you're going with it, so you can adjust.
Yeah. What's because is it very similar? Like, because you talk about like how many square meters of paving you're going to get done. Is basically everybody in the same sort of, realm once you get to a certain level of professional, size? Or is there like massive fluctuations between businesses because somebody's got a certain bit of kit here and somebody else has got, a certain way of doing it? Because I know with gardening, like say lawn mowing, really, like let's say acreage would be the most obvious one. Everyone is exactly the same almost in terms of time for the same job, because it all just comes down to the machine you buy. And there really isn't that much difference in the machine, right? Like, somebody could be really inexperienced and get it bogged or whatever. But once you get to a certain level of experience, a certain type of machine, you're all in the same ballpark. So is it like that with everybody, or is there huge differences?
Huge differences, because there's so many different variables that you could do within. Like, let's say you're doing paving. So most of the time we do paving, or 99% of the time we'll do paving on a concrete slab. So we'll pour the concrete slab first, and then pave on top of it. So like some people will do a 70 mil concrete slab, and like we'll do 100 mil concrete slab, and some people in between. So there's a slight difference there. Well, that's 30% difference there just for the amount of concrete that you're going to use. Some people will use a thinner steel, like Rio in it, and we'll use a thicker steel. So that's just in the concrete. And then in terms of laying the pavers, some people like waterproof the slab. They'll paint different additives on the back of the paver before they lay it. Some people they'll pour the concrete slab and then they'll do a screed so that it's all perfectly flat, so then they can tile it like you would tile inside.
Yeah.
And other people use a mortar base. So, and there's so many different variables. And then there's things like crazy paving. Some people are really specific on how they want the joints to look, and they want them all to look consistent and only 8 or 10 mil wide. And other people just go completely random and it looks like a dog's breakfast, but that's what they do. So they can do a lot more doing it quicker like that. So massive differences.
On just a technical level, is why do you lay on concrete? Because I don't know if that happens that much here. Most paving is just on sand here.
There's variances in the thickness of the pavers, so you can't lay, especially with the natural stone.
Yes.
So
yeah,
that's the reason for that. And there's no movement in it. The suppliers, that's how they recommend it to be laid. When we used to lay flexible paving, we wouldn't do anything bigger than like 300 by 300 or maybe 400 by 400 because when you're compacting it, the compaction plate it can't be too much smaller than what the actual paver is, because then you're just sort of doing one part of the paver. And so, but it's one of those things. I see in North America, they barely lay on slabs. It's all flexible paving. And it made me realise, I wonder why. I think we do it because other people do it. There's a lot of times it's not necessary, but that's just what we do.
Well, the first thing that came to mind, so last year I had a guy who was in Sydney who had built up a landscaping business, and he came over to Perth to see our maintenance business as he wanted to transition because, like you said, the rain was killing him. And they just couldn't run a sustainable business. And he thought, let's get into maintenance. And he was over here for something else and was like, oh, yeah. So I met up with him and we're driving around and he is just like amazed that like it's just sand. Right? Yeah. Like we're in a building place, a residential suburb that's being built up, right? So there's all these houses and they haven't brought in any sand. Right, they haven't brought in anything, and we do often, right? But in this specific spot, it's like there's literally a limestone mine like a kilometer away, so it's all beautiful. It's all the stuff you'd bring in is there anyway, and they're just building it straight onto that. And he's just having a laugh because he's like, "Well, it's nothing like that." And I wonder if that's why maybe our paving, because it's all sand, it actually holds better. Maybe the drainage or whatever, or maybe we don't get enough rain to worry it too much. Maybe if you were to go to New South Wales and you planted see this planting paving, that shows you how much I've got experience in that area, but you would have placed your paving. I'm clueless, I'm just thinking out loud, but maybe it would all wash away in the rain, and so that's why they do it. And I don't know.
I don't know. Yeah. You certainly get a lot more expansion and contraction with the clay soils that we have everywhere else. But I'm fascinated every time I talk to someone from WA about the sand and how they actually bring in clay to help improve the soil.
Yes.
Blows my mind.
And it's like, I've said this a few times, but like people will just lay. We got 1.6 mil of rain between November 20 and March 15 or something like that last year. Like that was total rainfall. Yeah. And it's so funny because you guys will talk about having a drought over there, and like a drought for you in summer is like the same amount of rainfall that we got like on an average summer year, but nobody has sprinkler systems over there, whereas we all have. Like, if you don't have a sprinkler system, you've just admitted defeat, that your lawn will die probably in mid-October to November at some point and just be a dust bowl until, April. And everybody else has committed. So we don't notice it so much, It's it's like you guys aren't even in the same, universe as what it's like over here.
So it makes sense though, because Australia is such a massive place. So you're going to have a lot of variances like that.
And then you go up to Kununurra, and it's like technically in the same state. And it's like the climate, the rain, they've got like an endless supply of water in Lake Argyle. It's like, that's another universe in and of itself. And yet it's still technically in the same state. It's like,
I reckon 90% of the jobs we do, at least we put irrigation systems in.
Oh yeah, awesome. So, but I guess I'm talking about the average homeowner. You know, the average homeowner in Perth. You know that if you actually want your lawn to survive, you want your plants to survive. Either you go complete succulent native cacti sort of thing, or you have to have some sort of sprinkler system. Whereas you can get away with it, you know, especially the further north you get, you know, up into Queensland and stuff. So, yeah,
it's crazy because it's one thing for it not to have any rain that you're going to need it, but also the fact that when it does rain, it's just going to drain straight through the sand as well.
yeah,
So you've got two reasons to need to have it in WA.
yeah, it's crazy. We've got a private school we do, which is like 3 kilometers from the coast or something like that, you know, and like it's so hard to keep it looking good because of the amount of compaction, and you know, in summer, just the water just drains. You know, it's like, man, if there was just something in it to hold it in there, organic matter or whatever, but we dig it out and it's like it's just beach. It's literally beach sand. Like it's not hyperbole. It's like it's so close to the coast. That's all it is. So yeah. So back to quote.
There's some suburbs like that around Geelong, and they're my favourite to work in because it's just like digging through lime.
Yes.
It's just and there's limestone around there as well.
Yeah. Well, I was going to get back to the quoting because this is the thing that I'm very interested by. And I don't know, some people might be like, this is weird, but the business mind in me is like, there's just so many moving parts because you're like the weather. How do you predict this? How do you, like, you might start digging, like I said, and you hit a rock. We don't really do that because, you know, rocks don't exist in WA. Oh, yeah, they do, but you know what I mean? But so the thing I'm thinking, right, is do you just chuck a bunch of margin and that's sort of covering you for expected rainy days or expected problems, and then when you don't have problems you win, and if you do have problems you're fine? Is that really how you do it?
Pretty much, yeah. There's like with when you're working at your hourly rate, it's good to keep in mind that you're going to lose, say, at least 5 days throughout the year. So
yeah,
that's one of those things you allow for that. It's not worst case scenario because it can get worse than that. But if you allow for, you're going to lose 5 days of rain, then if it doesn't, then that's a lot of profit for you. So you just, you need to allow for that. But it's also, margin on your materials, margin on your labor, just basically quote as high as you can to get the job, so that then if you do get it, you can make a profit even if something goes wrong. But it just swings around about. Sometimes you're going to make good profit. Sometimes it's going to rain 4 days of the one project and you're going to lose money. You're going to rely on other trades to do their thing as well, so that you can keep going in the right orderly fashion and timely manner. But it doesn't always happen. So blows me away how I can still be in business with that much variance and luck.
Yeah. It's all, I would just get to a point where I'd just be giving the I don't want to do it price every single time I quoted. If I had a huge demand, you know, I'd be like, this is going to be a 6,000% profit margin on this one. You know, obviously not that high, but honestly, it's like, it seems a lot more stressful. I mean, you're probably so used to it, but for me, it's like, because there's less variables, I have a lot more data on what is and isn't going to be profitable. So if I send an employee out to do a lawn mowing job, I know this is going to be, you know, it's going to take them, you know, this many minutes, and I'm going to be within this certain. Whereas I can imagine with those variables, it's insane, you know. But going back to, you've interviewed 100 people, right? What's the most common mistake that people are making when they first start, or even if they're intermediate in business, that you're seeing in the landscaping industry? Because I wonder if it's the same sort of problems we're having over in the maintenance side.
Yeah, it's just undercharging because people don't realise how much everything costs. So when you're an employee and you might hear that you're getting charged out at $99 an hour, and I'm only earning $33 an hour. So how much money must the boss be making if they're making $66 an hour off me? So then when they go out on their own, they might think, I'm just going to charge $55 an hour because then I'm going to be making heaps. If I'm making $22 an hour more than what I was getting paid before, I'm going to be swimming in cash. And then you realise there's all these expenses and overheads that you've got to take into account. And it's also when you start out, you've got low overhead, so you don't have to charge as much as what someone else might be. But eventually those things start to build up, so you've also got to keep putting your price up as your equipment and that grows for replacement value and just to being able to buy it in the first place. So it's the same for designers and landscapers. It's underquoting to start with, but then you just got to learn as you go.
And that's 100% the same problem. And I think for us, I think you're right in that it starts in the same way where people go, how hard can it be? But then I think the change is so difficult because, and I've talked about this before on the podcast, that people will tell you when you're too expensive, but they will never tell you when you're too cheap, or very, very rarely tell you when you're too cheap. So if you're doing 10 quotes and 3 of them just, get shocked, have a heart attack at your price, you're probably getting 3 of that, and you're probably getting 3 people who are in the middle, and you're probably getting 3 people who probably think you're cheap, and, give or take out of 10, but you only ever hear the 3 people who tell you that you're too expensive. And that just gets drilled into you. Oh, I'm too expensive. I can't raise my price. I got this message. Actually, no, it was a comment on a Facebook group of somebody who was listening to the podcast. And they're on a Facebook group called Lawnmowing Contractors Australia. And they put a comment up saying that they recently listened to our podcast, raised all their prices by 25% and didn't lose a single client. And so it's funny. It's like that's people start off in the wrong hourly rate, work out it's the wrong hourly rate, and then they don't have the confidence to go and change it. It actually often ends up being a lot easier or a lot less painful than what they think, right? Is that the same that goes on in your side of the industry?
Yeah, but I tell people to put their price up all the time as well, and do it myself. So and we're working in high ticket amounts as well that you're quoting people, but you're still working percentage terms. So let's say you're doing $100,000 job, I'll give you quoted 100,000. If your quote was 107,000, they're not going to say no.
Yes,
like if they're going to say yes to 100, they'll say yes to 107.
Yeah.
So and there's $7,000 just for nothing, just pure profit on top of what you already allowed for. So I'm doing that a lot more now. Like I'll work out the quote and try and work it out pretty fat, and then get to the end of it and think I'll just add 10%. So and that's one of the things of having a lot of work on is you can do that. So if you don't get that job, doesn't matter because you've got plenty of time to quote other ones that are going to come in the meantime. So and it's the same if you actually think about how much you charge in labour on a project. If you charge an extra $100 a day per person, so if there's 3 of you doing a job, the job's going to take you 4 weeks. That's $1,500 a week, so $6,000, and there's $100 each per person that you've charged extra, and it's not going to make a difference to the job. It obviously costs more, but it's not going to be
for
the
that type of
factor
client.
Saying yes and no.
When you found the right type of client and their budget's whatever, they don't care. $7,000 is nothing to someone who's really trying to. And the other thing as well about that from you is, and the person quoting that is that job becomes more enjoyable and less stressful if something goes wrong, because like with our packages that we do, let's say you've got a 50 square meter tiny little front lawn. We will book in, depending on the level of service, we will have in reserve a whole, whatever the most expensive service we do in that package, we would charge that single service twice, whether or not we need to do it or not. Because what that means is, let's say you've got 3 weed treatments for the year, and then you're still struggling with something that's hard to deal with, just treat it, just sort it out. We don't have to go back to them and be like, oh, we needed extra, whatever, because that's just so much hassle. And those people who want that high-end service, the last thing they want is to have another conversation with you and this and that, whatever. And it's exactly what you're saying. If you're going to spend $3,000 for us on an annual maintenance package for your front lawn, and then we chuck an extra $150 on it or whatever it is, just to cover a few little things, they don't care. No one's blinking an eyelid. It's not like I'm going from 3,000 to 6,000, or you're going from 100 to 200,000. And that's a maturity thing, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it just takes time and experience, but it's a small amount. It's the same like if anyone's been lucky enough to build a house, like when you go through the process of picking all the colours, it's one of those things when the total amount is high, adding a small amount to that, like if you're building a $300,000 house, if you add 10 grand to that, it's not that big a deal.
Yeah.
But if you're doing a $1,000 project and you add 10 grand to that, it's obviously a massive deal. So it's sort of got to be in relation to the overall project that you're working on, like you say. But yeah, 10% if you add to a project, it's extremely rare that that's going to be the deciding factor between getting it and not getting it.
Do you know, I do hear it every now and then where people will say things like, man, I love podcasts. I hate the ads, right? Can you give me 5 seconds to try and change your mind on this for a second? The reality is, if you love the podcast, love the ads, listen to the ads and support the ads, whether it's me or anybody else. And the reason is the reality of this model of business is that the podcast does not survive without the ads. If you love what we're doing at the podcast, here are 2 things you can do to support us. 1, jump on the lawn shed. We talked about them before. You're probably busy mowing a lawn, cutting some hedges, driving, something like that. Jump on the lawn shed, make a trade account, just check out the products that they have. Say you found us through the Australian Lawn and Garden podcast. You don't even have to buy anything right now. When you do need something, jump on there and that will support us. The second thing is our Patreon account. If you're not somebody who wants to buy products or you want to support in an even, a more direct way, jump on Patreon. You can support us through 2 things. 1, very topical. You can buy me a Pepsi Max every month, or you can buy me a Zinger box every month. Full disclaimer, I don't actually spend that money on those specific things. It's actually more likely to go to things like the costs of actually running the podcast. But it's just a fun, lighthearted way of going about it. So honestly, if you want to have the podcast keep going, there's a huge amount of time that goes into this. If you have learned anything that is worth $5, jump on Patreon, support us to that amount. If we haven't done anything of any value, then don't support us because we don't deserve it. But I hope we have done something. Jump on there, support us, help us to keep going. It's a lot of work, and I'm sure you can understand. Anyways, let's get back into the podcast. I want to talk to you about the garden show because that's another thing that I'm clueless on. So for those who are in the industry or new to the industry, you may not have heard of the Melbourne International Flower and Garden Show, which it's a massive event. I've never been, pretty much because I'm on the other side of the country, but it's like basically the who's who of Australian designers at some point will go and do something in this show, and they turn a massive park into people will come in and do landscaping in this park basically, and then rip it all down a week later or whatever it is. It seems beautiful. I see videos of it. It wasn't that long ago that it was on, right?
Yeah, it was at the end of March.
Yeah, in the March. And I follow all these people on Instagram like Charlie Albone or Jason Hodges or whatever, and they're doing their designs and they've got something in there and it looks amazing and it looks like you're in someone's backyard in the middle of this park and everybody comes. So you've done gardens for the show, right? So here's some practical things that I just want to know. 1, how long does it take you to make this garden? Does it destroy your soul to rip it down 7 days later after all that work? And 3, how much does it cost to install? You're saying no to work. You're going there. You're doing it all. That seems like it's a massive commitment, right?
Yeah. So you get 9 days to put it together, but we pre-built a lot of it because the garden we did this year was one of the large show gardens. So it was a 10 by 13 meter garden. So I started building it in November, just doing bits and pieces that we could then build them on a pallet. So then you can get a forklift to load it up onto our truck and drive it up to Melbourne. And then they get a forklift to unload it, put it into the garden, and then it's all just about built, ready to go, that part of it. So the more you can build beforehand, the better it is, because then you can get more intricate details into it rather than what you can do in the 9 days. And then, pulling it down is the worst part because you have it's open for 5 days, and you get 3 days to pull it down.
And what's the cost?
So I reckon, this year I spent, I don't know if it was 60 or 70,000 because I stopped counting because it was breaking my soul. But I also have built a house this year, so I was designing stuff for the garden, for the garden show. Thinking, this would be perfect for the garden show, and I thought, doesn't really suit my house, so I'm not going to put it in there. And then there'd
Oh
be other things.
no!
There'd
I
be
thought you
things
were
I
going to
want for my
say.
house that
Sorry, you
doesn't
go.
really suit the garden, but I thought I'll put it in there anyway because then I'll use it after the garden show. So I
thought
spent more.
you were going to say you were going to make your dream garden, put it in the Melbourne Garden Show, and then just truck it to your house. But
That's pretty much part of what I did. That was part of the design was to things that would work at my house. So I've got stuff at the shed because I haven't got any time or money to do my landscaping at the moment. But I've got a lot of stuff sitting there ready to go when I do. But I wouldn't have spent as much this year if I wasn't doing things like that. I would have borrowed stuff that was available from suppliers that I wasn't 100% on, but they were available. But because I wanted stuff for my house, I was actually buying it. Like I got a good rate on a lot of the stuff, but I was buying it to use in the garden show, and then I'll build it at my place as well. So, but yeah, that amount is not uncommon, and people spend a lot more than that as well. And that's not including the missed work that you're doing at the same time, like the work
that's what I was going to get on. So
if
you've got
basically goes on top.
So 9 days. So that's 9 calendar days, but you're working over that weekend, I'm guessing.
Yeah.
And then 3 days after. So 12 days is on a normal work week, 2.5 almost weeks worth of work because you're counting the weekends as well. And then I guess the 5 days you've got to be there. I don't know if your team's there, but you've got to be there.
You don't have to be there, but I love that part of it. So I was there all 5 days, but my guys were working at the time.
Yeah, and that's where you're going to get your return on investment from building relationships. People would look at your garden and go, oh, he's the face behind the garden, or maybe they've seen you on the podcast and so they just want to come meet you, say hello, thanks for what you do. But so that's a lot of time that you're not working, not bringing in money. That's a lot of time you're paying your staff, and I'm assuming the 60, 70 grand it was just in parts or product or what do you call it?
No, it was like labour and materials.
Okay.
Because I did have some people, some of the landscapers gave us a hand, like they volunteered their time, so that was invaluable as well.
Awesome.
But yeah, you don't do the garden show if you're wanting to, like, when you do advertising, you usually want to get a return on investment more than what you paid, but that's not what you do the garden show for. You don't do that so that you get more, more than what you spent on it. It's a long-term investment, but like we'd be booked out for 9 or 12 months even if I didn't do it. So it's not like we might get work from it, but we would have got work anyway. So it doesn't make a difference to the amount of work you can do. So it's just something I did because it was like a bucket list item. Because we've built a lot of gardens there, the smaller gardens, and there's some that I designed and some that other people designed. But I wanted to do one of the large show gardens that I designed and built. So done that now, so I won't be doing it again because I can't afford to do it again.
Yeah. Can you do like a sponsored garden for somebody? Maybe like a big landscape supply company wants to, so they'll partner with you and all that sort of stuff and bring the costs down. I guess that might be limiting as well to your creativity if you have to use all their stuff and you want to get somebody else.
Yeah, that happens though. There's like Beyond Blue always sponsor a garden. I don't know how much they chip in, but Lawn Solutions sponsored Charlie Albone's garden, and he got like I was looking at his turf. Like the turf I got was supplied to me as well, but it was Sir Grange, and because I said I wanted tall fescue, and they said we don't supply that, but we can do some Sir Grange and we'll grow it on so it looks tall. So okay, sounds good, but it's obviously completely different. It looked nothing like it. It was all patchy, and then Charlie had some sports turf rolls. So they were like, he had 3 rolls.
Big, jumbo ones?
Yeah, they were just massive. And then they rolled it out. So it looked like that he'd striped it because of the width of it. So his lawn looked amazing because he's sponsored by them as well. So it does help.
It helps when you're on Better Homes Gardens.
Exactly,
yeah.
But he would have spent a lot of his own money as well because he's pretty competitive and wanting to do more than the minimum. So got no doubt he would have spent plenty as well.
So here's the thing that I think, like, one of the things that I found that happens in business is when you see people from a distance, competitors, right? You hate them, And then you start, well, I hate them, but you get what I mean. Like there's a bit of a, you're eating my lunch sort of attitude. And then you can start to meet them and you're like, actually, no, you're pretty nice. You're a nice guy, And maybe that's what the flower festival would bring up, both sides of that animosity. Maybe it depends on your personality and stuff. Like people, I'm not saying you specifically, but there'll be people out there who just, never look at each other because, they bid on the same job and somebody ripped them off or whatever. And then there'll be people who make lifelong friendships. It could be like an awkward / amazing place at the same time, couldn't it?
It could be, yeah. But like one of the best things about doing the garden show is the people that are there involved in it. So, but yeah, like Charlie and Jason Hodges, who you mentioned before, they're both awesome people who I couldn't speak more highly of. Just some of the nicest people you could talk to. And same with Charlie had all his team there as well, and they were just, they're just nicer than normal people. Like, you meet other people, and they have no impact on you, but they're not bad people. They're just, you meet people. But his employees were just awesome people as well. So yeah, it's awesome meeting all the different people from different companies as well. And there's not much like everyone wants to win, but you don't begrudge on anyone if they beat you, because it depends. If they've got a shit garden, then you would. But
yes,
they're all they were all awesome this year. So yeah,
there's a honesty that if somebody's won, that they've done a good job, and you can appreciate that. Has there ever been? All right, so I was going to say, has there been a really controversial winner where they did something that some random judge thought it was good and everybody else just thought, what the heck?
Well, that's the tricky thing, is there's the judging scorecard sort of thing that you got to, there's criteria. So one of them is meeting the design brief. So you create your own design brief. And the public don't see what that is, so they don't know how well you've done on that. So there's been gardens in the past that looking at it, it doesn't look all that as good as what another one, but it could have just been the way that they worded that it met their design brief. They got a lot of marks on that.
So they might say like it needs to be sustainable, or it needs to have like, what sort of stuff are they putting in this design brief?
No, so they don't specify it. So like with my garden, I said what my design brief was that I was trying to target. So it's how well you explain that with what you've built. So some people get copywriters to write their design brief, because like I've got no idea how to word it properly. Obviously, as you can hear me talking,
there's a whole angle. There's a whole world here. So like you would pay a professional to write the design brief that you have in your head because you want to win. Wow, it gets technical.
Yeah,
man.
That's part of it, but it's also like not everyone likes the same thing. So a garden I like, you might not like. So there's one of the years I came second in the category I was in, and I did a tropical garden, and the garden that won was native and real natural. So they're complete. They almost couldn't be further from the styles. So that's just the taste of the judges at the time. So
now
if it was
be honest, when you came,
might have been better.
So I was going to, sorry, I'll cut you off there, but I'm just saying, be honest. Your garden was better than theirs, wasn't it? When you came second, it wasn't. Okay, no. All right. Because my personal taste, native gardens for me are a bit boring. Right now, some people do them amazingly. There's always outliers, right? But on average, I feel very uninspired by native gardens, right? But tropical stuff, I used to, when I was younger, I used to love sort of European formal style, right? And then now I'm sort of like, that's a lot of maintenance, like, don't know about that. But tropical stuff is sort of my flavor at the moment, or a bit eclectic, weird, messy. Give me some really interesting plant varieties. Like, I'm sick of kangaroo paws and grevilleas, So for me, you just saying tropical versus native, I'm already in your camp. I'm 60% on your side, So
yeah. But if you have seen native gardens and you didn't like them, it could be the designer. So when you see someone who like a good design garden, this makes a massive difference. So it's something I only realised like in the last 8 years. We worked for a designer, and when they put the plants in, I was just blown away at how amazing it looked. So there's people who charge tens of thousands of dollars for a design, and you get what you pay for. So it makes a difference. If someone's charging $400, they're not going to do a garden as nice as someone who's going to be charging 10 grand.
So I think why I don't like the native gardens, there's two sides of it. One is that people who are picking the native garden are typically want the easiest thing possible, right? And I'm talking about not at your level where you're doing high-end stuff. My world is average homeowners, who want maintenance. So we'll go to their property and they've literally just gone to the tube stop section, and thrown a bunch of stuff in there, and it's just so boring and uninspiring. And the mulch is 2.5 years old and hasn't been replaced, and there's no form or structure to it. And they've just gone for what's the most water-wise thing, and then they still turn their sprinklers on twice a week, and so things like that. I see so much of that, and the commercial landscaping as well. I mean, over here, I don't know what it's like over there, but over here, commercial landscaping is all just like use a grevillea ground cover, and I don't know, you might get some snake vine for some flowers that are interesting or a different color than skinny WA native leaves. But I'm like, it's so I typically find that if someone has gone for a tropical garden because they're bucking the trend, they're bucking the curb, they probably have actually hired somebody who's actually thought about it a little bit more. So maybe there's a bit of bias there that just comes from whether or not it's designed or not. But yeah, I have seen, and I actually tried to get somebody on who you've had on the podcast, Bonnie Stacey. I don't know if you remember doing her podcast. So unfortunately, we started recording and there was a massive delay in audio, right? Huge. It was like I would talk 5 seconds later, she would hear it, so we just couldn't make it work. I got to get her on again at some point, but she does native stuff here that I like, but just in general, you get what I mean about the lazy sort of.
Yeah.
Do you see a lot of that?
The public space stuff is just completely uninspiring. They all use lamandras and all exactly the same plants just because they don't have to do anything to it. They all look exactly the same. Yeah. Boring as batshit. But I just found out a plant. Like one of the good things, we build our own gardens that we design, but we also work with a lot of other designers. So I learn a lot by the fact that we work with other designers. And we're just doing one where we're putting in Elixir buxifolia, which is a native. And
what's
that? It's nothing too. It's I think it's called sea box. It's like one of the toughest plants you can find, but you can also topiary it. So I'm going to my garden's going to have a heap of different types. It's going to have teucriums and some buxus, and it's also going to have this Elixir buxifolia in there.
I'm going to Google this. Elixir.
AlYxia.
I started with an E. ALY.
Yep, XIA.
So bucks.
Buxifolia.
Okay, I'm gonna put it on the screen. Okay.
So if you know your Latin, you know that it's like box-like foliage with.
I don't know my Latin. Tell me about how much Latin do you know? Well,
just the plant names, but because I studied horticulture before I started landscaping. Just did 1 year of certificate 4, which is a 2-year course, but I learned a lot about plants during that. So it's the names are descriptive. So buxifolia means buxus-like foliage.
Right. I did know like grandifolia means big leaves and things like that.
Yeah.
So
it's pretty cool once you understand how they
that does look like buxus.
Yeah, so that's they're natives in that photo. So it just depends how you use them.
So what other plants that are you using? Well, I've got this up here that you think are underknown or underappreciated.
Yep. That Ostrostipus topoides is another one.
Do you know? Can you pick ones that are easier to spell?
Ostro is like Australia.
Okay. Ostro.
Stipa. STIPA.
I see it here. And which one?
It's probably the only one. Oh no, there's a couple there. So Stipoides is the one.
Here we go.
So that's I think speargrass is the common name, but that's a pretty cool plant. It looks a bit like the lamandras or the poas more so, but it's got really nice form about it, and you don't have to. There's no cutting it back. It just looks the same its whole life. So poas can look a bit dead sometimes.
Yes.
Yeah, but that's just a nice grass. Gets a meter by a meter, but you want it to let it grow in its space, so you don't want them clumped together.
But yeah,
there's you go. There's a vine that I think it's called a gum vine, which again just learned about it recently because the designer we're working with. I don't even know what the botanical name is of it, but apparently it grows in full sun and full shade. It's just tough as nails and looks pretty cool as well. Like looks pretty nice.
Yeah.
So there's just a lot of natives that people don't even know about. So when they think of natives, they think of those gardens you're talking about where they've just gone and got cheap tube stock and don't do anything with it. But there's so many different types to choose from, and you can have them so that doesn't even look like a native garden.
Yeah, and you also talk, like, when you talk about natives, it's like, well, and I've talked about this. We an episode that will come out this afternoon when we're recording, but it wouldn't have been out already. We did with, Chloe Thompson from Been There, Dug That.
Yeah.
So we were talking to her, and when we were talking to her, she was talking about like what native plants she likes and stuff. And the reality is that, like we talked about before with Kununurra up north in Queensland or down in Tasmania, native just means it's Australian, right? But like doesn't necessarily mean it's water-wise, doesn't necessarily mean it's actually going to thrive in your specific climate. You may have frosts and you go get a tropical plant from bloody Cairns and you're asking for trouble with that,
Yeah. That's something else I don't like about specifically native gardens is that you're better off putting in plants that suit the area. It doesn't need to be native, or it doesn't matter where it comes from, because there's plants from South Africa that are going to do just as well in WA as they do in South Africa. So you just got to choose the right plant. It doesn't matter where it's from. And same with plants from New Zealand. So when people want a native garden, I know what they're actually thinking. They don't want plants that are just from Australia so much. If they ask for an Indigenous garden, then they might want to be more hardcore and local, but they just want plants that have got that kind of native look about them. So they wouldn't like that elixir buxifolia because they wouldn't think it's a native, potentially.
Yeah. I've learned, I never knew that plant existed before. So
neither did I until a couple of weeks ago.
There you go. We're learning together. So we get you on the podcast. The thing that I also is my pet peeve, which I touched on before, and do you get a lot of this where people put in reticulation and then they overwater the heck out of their natives? I talked about with Chloe, and I didn't talk about this part of it, but with Chloe, we did a maintenance thing for a refinery over here. I think they had some sort of quota of plants they needed because they did 67,000 tube stocks in 2 hectares. So it was 3 and a bit plants per square meter. But they had pigface and Canidia prostrata, like massive ground covers, and they had dwarf banksias, and they had kangaroo paws, and they had like so many, and they didn't have form or function to it. It was like lucky dip, throw this in here, throw that in there. And they had the most frustrating thing was in the grand entrance, and this place was a $300 million facility. That was the second part was opening. It was going to be more than $500 million. And they've planted pigface, like less than the width of my hand from the path, which means half of it you are just going to be pruning every single week. Like it's just dumb planting. Anyways, so the stupidest thing about this place, which I never mentioned, was that they had a water recycling section, right? Which you're like, fantastic, water recycling. Sounds great. They had this whole dripper thing, and it was stuff you couldn't drink. You could only go back into the ground. And it was sectioned off because you weren't really supposed to walk in there. It wasn't that dangerous, but, it was, I would say, the size of half a soccer field, something like that. And they still have filled it with natives. But it was watering 24/7. And all the natives were getting fungal diseases, dying, everything. And it was like, what are you doing? Put in like a weeping willow. Like put in the most water-hungry thing you've ever seen in your life. Because they've literally, I don't know what the designer, I don't know if it was just like government regs or whatever they had to follow. But they literally had the most hardiest things ever dying because they had wet feet from this dripper system, like your standard like dripper, brown dripper line, just constantly feeding this place with water. And we ended up pulling out, I reckon we pulled out 10,000 plants. And like they were tube stock and stuff like that because they were just growing into each other, and then things were getting overwatered and dying. And anyways, it's just, I don't know where I was going with that.
But it's pretty wild that things can get overwatered in WA. Like, that's a lot of water to do that.
Well, the other thing that annoyed me was, like, why don't you, like, you've got 2 hectares. You could have made this place amazing, because the amount of area that, say, like, you wouldn't reticulate the whole area, but let's spend some more money, like, organize those plants a little bit better, extend those sprinkler systems out, right? And then you could actually have a beautiful, beautiful, like, area that people would really want to come and work. And instead it was just a glorified council strip, you know, and
I wonder who does that type of design, whether it's an actual landscape architect or designer, or if it's just an architect who's just saying, you know, to put these native plants in, because these ones are native and indigenous, so we'll use them. So they just pick them from a list. Don't care how big they get.
I can send you the plans after the podcast and tell you exactly who did it. So, I mean, I don't know. I don't know if you've ever had any. I'm not trying to throw anyone under the bus, because I'm pretty sure that the landscape designer wasn't proud of that moment. And I wonder, this is why I wonder if there was government things where, because it was a refinery, they had to plant so many plants or whatever it was. But I was like, man, like, even just the money to plant 67,000 tube stocks, so close. Like, why don't you just plant half of them and then like save money? You know, just now. Anyways, again, I don't know where I was going with that. Oh, I know where I was going with that. What are the plants that you hate when clients ask you, where they, you know, like, they're like, oh, can you put this in my garden? And you're like, oh, not this again. Like, you know, here's another cliche, you know, or they've seen something on Instagram from Europe that's just never going to work here, or something like that.
Yeah, I've only put in one yucca in
that's what
years.
Chloe said.
Yeah, and that's because the client wasn't going to pay me if I didn't put it in. But
wow.
Yeah, it's only been one. So they are just one of the worst plants that have ever existed. But yeah, there's nothing outside of that. Nothing comes to mind. But that's clearly the worst. So yeah, that's not going in any modern designs.
One of the things over here, because we can't really do hydrangeas here, right? You can in exactly the right spot, and obviously there's microclimates and things like that. But in general, hydrangeas just don't work. Is there something like that, which is a really nice, attractive plant, that is almost disappointing, but the reality is it's just not likely to work in Geelong?
Yeah, there's a couple of ones that grow like in northern New South Wales and even sort of Sydney, because they're a few degrees warmer than what we have here. But we get some frosts that are pretty rough. So I can't remember what their botanical name is, but it's copper spoons. I can't remember I'll go blank, because I know I've got a certain list of plants that I've got in my head, and if I have a new one in, like that elixir buxifolia has gone in there now, so another one has had to come out.
Yes.
A certain amount of memory. But
I'll put it on the screen.
Yeah, I'll know it when I see it.
Is that it?
Yeah, it's the Kalanchoe is the one.
Yeah.
So there's one. There's one that's like that. Looks pretty cool, because it's got like that bronze foliage and green foliage.
I've never seen that before.
Yeah, it's a succulent, so I reckon they might go all right in WA.
Probably.
But, we can get one that's called silver spoon, which is nowhere near as impressive, but it's got the same shape, but it's just all silver. So yeah, there's a lot of plants that are sort of people see indoor that like you can try outside. But there's just things like that. Like when I did the tropical garden at the garden show, I used a lot of plants that were kind of indoor plants, because they're sitting in the pot. They're not actually they don't need to be there for their life. It's just for 5 days. So that was pretty fun doing that, because you could use a lot of plants that I'd never get to use in a normal situation.
Yeah. But that's interesting as well, the indoor-outdoor thing, because indoor plants have become so attractive over the last sort of 4 or 5 years or something like that. And I'm sure the nurseries are loving it, because everyone's going to place it right next to their aircon or something like that. And then in 3 weeks, it's starting to struggle. And in 2.5 months, it's dead, and they go back and buy more. It's a much better business model than native plants that actually survive, isn't it?
Yeah. And like the indoor plants in certain states are outdoor plants in other states as well. So that's what
true.
the issue can be. So like there's plants that they grow outside in Queensland that we can only have indoor. So I get a bit jealous about that.
If we can go back to the podcast, because you've interviewed a lot of smarty pants. Not that I've listened to every single podcast that you've done, but I've listened to a few here and there. And is there ever been a moment where you've been interviewing somebody and you've been sort of pinching yourself that this person's come on the podcast?
There's been a couple, like even the one that's out at the moment. So Kate Seddon, she's not a massive name that everyone in Australia's going to know, but she's like a pretty awesome designer. And we had Paul Bangay on, so he was the most well known.
Yeah, he was the one I was thinking of. Jason Hodges you had on. I've listened to the Jason Hodges one. That was one of your first ones back.
Yeah, the audio is horrific on that one. Like, because it took 4 hours to edit that episode because one of the microphones wasn't working, so I was chopping and changing between backup microphones, and yeah, that was the worst audio of any of the episodes I've done because it was when I started, I did them all outside.
Yes, right.
And then I ended up moving to Zoom, which is a lot better.
Now,
my favorite designer is Steve Taylor from Cos Design. So even though he's kind of a friend, it was still good to have him on as well. But yeah, every single person who comes on, I honestly appreciate them taking the time to come on because they're taking time out of their day to become on the podcast for no real benefit to them, just to help people in the industry and because also people want to talk about the industry as well. Like, that's why I do it. But yeah, there's no big names. Like there's a couple in America who've got like hundreds of thousands of Instagram followers who I'm trying to get on. But if they come on, I'm still not going to care any more than anyone else who I get on. Like, it'd be cool to have them on, but it's, people are people. They're not. There's no celebrities who impress me enough to get excited about it like that.
No, not after 100 episodes.
No.
The other side of it as well. Now, don't name names. I'm not asking you to throw someone under the bus, but has there ever been somebody who you asked on who was like, I'm too good for this, and just like said it outright, or even somebody on the other side of it who you had on who you thought was going to be a really interesting guest and turned out to be really boring? Don't name names because I'm not trying to throw anyone under the bus, but surely after 100 episodes, you've got some experiences that are a bit more than the average nice interaction.
Well, I asked Jamie Jury to come on as the first guest and he never got back to me, so I'll throw him under the bus.
Bloody Jamie.
Yeah. He won't hear it though, so it doesn't matter. And if he does, he can only redeem himself by coming on.
We'll judge him. Everybody send Jamie Jury a message telling him to go on Joel Barnett's podcast. He'll never do it then, will he? He'll get offended that we've done that.
He's not going to do it anyway, so why not? But what annoys me the most is more when people will say, yeah, I'll come on, and then that's the last you hear of them. Like,
interesting.
I've had people who say, no, it's not something for me. I don't want to come on. No problem at all. It's not for everyone. So I completely understand that. So it doesn't bother me at all. But and they say they'll come on, and I've been stood up by one person, so that like booked an appointment, and then they just didn't rock up, and then message them saying you're coming on, and then you can see that they've seen it, and then they don't get back to you still. Like, and then I saw that person at the garden show, and they're just chatting to me like nothing happened. So
did you bring it up?
Nothing. No, I didn't. But I wasn't very friendly towards.
No, weren't you? I would have been like, "Oh, you're talking almost as good as it was when you were on the podcast." Oh, actually,
it's just
awkward.
Just being polite, because I've had people ask. No, I actually say yes every time. But if I didn't want to do something, I would just say no. Like, actually, you probably, I don't know if you'd get them yet, but you get a lot of emails from people recommending. Like, they have like people who recommend other people for the podcast. So they'll email you saying, I've got this person to have on. Like, I get a few of those, and I don't reply to all of them because they're just sort of just a sort of a spam almost.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's what annoys me the most is the people who say they'll come on and then they don't.
I've had people recommend themselves for the podcast who...
Yeah, I'll get them as well.
Yeah, because, I mean, I had a guy who... He's on a Facebook group that I'm a part of, like a Lawnmower Contractors Australia group, and I don't really know who he is. And he messaged me saying he would be a great guest, which is a red flag to start with. And then secondly, told me that he had recently left the industry. So I was like, what? Like, hold on, what? I'm so confused. Like, you obviously don't like the industry enough, or you weren't successful in business, or, you know, whatever. Anyways, I mean, I've had a few others. I had a guy from America who had about 300 Instagram followers or whatever it was messaging me saying he thinks he'd be a great guest for the podcast. I'm like, do you realize it's called, I didn't reply, it could be possible. It's literally called the Australian Lawn and Garden Podcast. You're not even in the country, you know? Like, oh man, you get stuff like that.
Yeah, one of the good episodes I had was a guy in North America though, like he was from Colorado. So yeah, they certainly do things differently there, but yeah, some business advice is certainly relevant.
Well, the thing that I'm a business for sure, 100%. I mean, there'd be business geniuses, but I feel like my biggest frustration growing my business over the last 10 years has been that when I wanted to learn something about lawns and gardens, all the content was American, right? And so I got nothing against Americans, but they've already got all the content, you know? Like I wanted to talk to people in Australia who knew stuff and grow the industry. You know, imagine the shortcuts that your podcast has given business owners. Like, I don't know if you feel this. I feel this. I get jealous at the people who listen to my podcast thinking, man, I wish my own podcast was around 10 years ago, you know, like, because I'm hearing people tell their story and stuff like that. And it reminds me of all the dumb things I did when I first started business. And I'm like, man, that took me 6 years to learn not make that mistake again. And you guys are getting shortcuts, 6 months in, which is great, but yeah.
It's one thing to hear the advice, but it's also another thing to actually put it into place. So like I hear a lot of things that I should be doing even now that I can improve on, but I don't do anything about it. So it's you also need to take action as well as listening.
Yeah, you need to slap yourself on the wrist for that. What's the thing that you see after 100 interviews that is like all the successful people are doing, or most of the successful, like a common theme, people who have got, whether they've got a lot of employees or not, where they enjoy their business, they're successful, they're actually, is there something there that's really common?
Probably just being good people. So, yeah, because there's one thing about, like, there are some good business, like successful businesses that are run by people who aren't good people. So yes, you don't have to be a good person to run a good business, but it certainly helps a lot more to have better relationships, because building relationships within business is critical, not just within your own industry, but outside of it as well, because you never know what opportunities are going to arise from that. So that's what I found. So because the people who come on the podcast, 99% of them are all awesome people, and that's why they're happy to do it. So yeah, that's you win a lot of things in life by just being a decent person.
Yeah. And I think as well, like if it's not just about being a decent person, because you got to be smart, but you are shooting yourself in the foot by being smart and then not caring about people, not actually being decent, because that's your reputation, really, isn't it? I guess that's sort of what you're talking about there.
Yeah, like I was just talking to someone today about someone else in the industry, because someone messaged me about them, and we were just both sharing stories, thinking it's insane that no one sees this side of this person because they're so successful. But if you actually saw what they're really like, no one would deal with them. So
right.
So that you still can build yourself a massive name, but it's I don't know if it'll catch up to them eventually, but yeah, you certainly go a lot further when people are talking positively about you and sharing good stories than negative.
Yeah. Well, another thing that I like about your podcast, moving away from throwing people under the bus, right? When you do I love throwing people under the bus, but I want to keep it respectful. I'm not going to ask you who that person was, but
I'll wait till it's finished.
Yeah, maybe off air, and then I'll post about it anyway. No, I'm joking. But talking about being a good person, right? It reminds me, I've listened to a couple of your episodes. A recent Facebook. Not you do Instagram live, and then you answer people's questions. And you've said it here a few times where it's like, you know, you've alluded to some of the mistakes you've made, like maybe a business coach or you know, pricing and things like that. But in your podcast as well, you talk about your mistakes, and like that's so valuable, right? And so looking back, what are the moments in your business where you've made the biggest change through noticing and modifying something you were doing? Like, noticed a mistake, you changed it, and bam, things started turning around. What were those sorts of things you were getting wrong?
Probably, like, it's not a good answer because we've already spoken about it, but not having a vision or goals. So just taking on every job that came along. That was easily the biggest thing that I've changed that improved things. But something more smaller is just having different bank accounts for money to go into before you transfer it off. So when I pay my employees, I've got a pay-as-you-go separate bank account. So I'll transfer money into their account, and I'll transfer the pay-as-you-go amount into that account, so that then at the end of the month, I've got that money to transfer. It's there ready to go. And if I need it to help with cash flow, I can transfer it across, which happens every single month. But it's good to be able to put it in there. In a perfect world, it would stay in there until I need to take it out. But you can do the same thing with BAS. So like there's a book called Profit First. I haven't read it, but it's kind of the same thing like that. Is just having separate bank accounts for everything. That's like I got told by my accountant to do that like right at the start of the business. And I was like, yeah, no worries, I'll do that. Didn't do it. 10 years later. But yeah, that's a massive thing because everyone's like, not everyone, but a lot of people struggle with cash flow, which can make it hard to do that. But you're also not going to get in the trap of seeing you've got a fair bit of money in your account. So you buy something and then you realize, that money was all allocated to something else. So that's something that I'm sharing as much as I can to get people to start doing that, is to have a separate bank account for those things to put it into. And even if you've got an account, like a 30-day account with a supplier, and you get $100 worth of soy from them, you can put that $100 into that an account. So you've got that there at the end of the month. So you've got that money, you can use it if you need it. But if not, it's there ready to go. That's an extreme case of it. But if I had endless amounts of money, I would do that. I'd just be putting certain amounts away into those separate accounts. I'd have probably 20 different accounts because I'd have stuff for everything. But the more you can do that, the better.
I think as well this is one of the things, if you're really bad with money, right, about just having some form of structure, it's almost like if you're really bad with food and you eat too many single boxes like I do, like just having some sort of plan, right? Even if you don't necessarily follow the plan to a T, right? Like you still follow it mostly, you're still better. And just even having the accounts like you're talking about, you don't have to be necessarily religious or super strict with it, but just having those accounts forces you to be more disciplined. And yes, I read Profit First many years ago, maybe 8 years ago, and that was huge. That was a massive thing for my business. He's got another book, Mike Michalovich or something like that. He's got a funky name. Yeah. He's got another one called The Pumpkin Plan, which I don't know if you've ever heard of that one before, but that's very similar sort of story of what you were talking about going from taking whatever you can get and then focusing on specific types of jobs and I guess putting all your nutrients into one pumpkin to make it really nice and big. But like he's also very humble because in Profit First he talks about how he had an amazing business exit, made a lot of money, and then lost it all because, he was a bit stupid about it. So, we've been going for an hour and 20 minutes, and it felt like, we only just got started, mate. How long are your podcasts usually?
I try and keep them under an hour, but there's some that I'm having so much fun. Like there's a fellow in WA is the most enjoyable chat that I've had.
Who's that?
I was talking to him, went for an hour and 15 minutes. That's Brady from Boutique Timeless Landscapes.
Oh, I don't know about him. I've got to find him now. I've got a few names.
He's just just an extremely awesome guy to chat to. Just a lot of fun, that one was. Like he's just a bit of a surfer dude kind of vibe about him. But that was pretty cool. But even talking about the different accounts, most people don't think they're going to have an employee who's going to have long service leave, but one of my guys
oh my goodness,
long service leave. So you can also put your money aside for long service leave, and most of the time that won't get used. But if it does, you've got it there, and if it doesn't, then you've got money you can spend on something else as well. So there's so many different things you could put aside.
And this is the argument for financing equipment as well, right? That you got to be smart about it. You can't go over the top with financing, but when you're trying to grow a business, if you've got, let's say, $50,000 in cash and you're going to go buy a new truck and you're like, sweet, I'll just spend the 50 grand on the truck, buy it outright. If some emergency happens soon after and you need 20 grand, you are kicking yourself that you didn't finance it, because now the interest rates are killing people, but for the majority of the last 10 years when I've been in business, interest is not what's killing people. It's buying equipment they didn't really need. If you need the equipment, the extra whatever percent of interest that you're paying, I don't know, a $50,000 truck, you might be spending $10,000 more over the life of the loan. I don't know what it is, right? I'm making up these numbers, people, so don't quote me. But over 5 years, it's $2,000 a year, which is what? $50 a week, something like that. $50 a week to keep $50,000 in your account at certain points in business maturity. Sometimes you should just do it, but there's a real value to that. Now, people don't go out and just finance everything for the sake of it, right? Like, keep your wits about you. But I made that mistake when I was growing my business, and that I should have gotten more finance earlier on in my business for things that I didn't see as, like, for example, I bought a MowMaster. Do you guys know about MowMasters, the big cylinder mowers?
No, I've heard you talk about it a fair bit though. It does sound like an impressive piece.
Yeah, they're a very niche thing. They're about $6,000-$7,000 for a lawnmower. They're the same mowers that they use to cut the cricket pitches at the MCG and all that sort of stuff, right? And so amazing mowers, right? My first one I bought like with cash, and that was dumb, because if I had financed it, I still have it now, and it's such a small machine. Soon after I did that, I was hiring people and I had some cash flow issues, right? And it wasn't like life-threatening or anything like that. It was just, I was in a tough time because basically I had one business that owed me $24,000 because they had changed administrative systems, and it was a big contract. And so it just got more and more and more and more tight as they weren't paying. And I was like, man, I should just finance that and pay the $800 of interest over the life of whatever it was. Things like that, it seems for some people listening, they're like, what? Why the heck would you do that? But when you're trying to grow and you're spending money here, there, and everywhere, there is a time and place for it. It definitely is.
Yeah. And it's good to talk to an accountant, not just at the end of every financial year when you want to get your tax done, but if you wanted to make purchases like that, talk to them about the different options, and they'll teach you something you had no idea about, because that's their area of expertise.
Yeah. Well, mate, you've got a podcast that you've got to do in about 15 minutes. Is that right?
Yeah, about 4 o'clock. Yeah.
So
I'm all set up, ready to go, thankfully.
Yeah, well, that's true, actually. You're already in here. I've just gone back to back on podcasts recording this. For those who are unaware, I had about a 6-minute gap between the two of these, and you're going back to back. This would be like a relay, hey, at the Olympics. Like, we just keep handing the baton back to each other. And
the guy I've got on, he's not a podcaster though, so it's going to end with him.
Oh, okay, all right, yeah. Who are you asking? Who have you got on? If you don't mind me asking,
it's actually a mate of mine he's another landscaper in Geelong. So Kurt O'Toole from Urban Elements. So no one would have heard of him outside of Geelong. But he's taught me the most about landscaping business, I reckon. Just in general chats that we have. So it's not like I've never had a mentor or anything, but if I had to pick someone who has been the most like a mentor, it'd be him.
Well, let's finish with this then. If people are listening to this and they want to hear more from you, they should go listen to your podcast, which is the Landscape Podcast. Is it Landscape or Landscaping?
Landscaping.
Landscaping, yeah.
It's a creative name.
Well, mine's not any better, is it? The Australian Lawn and Garden Podcast. It is what it is. I think you and I had this. Exactly. You had the same idea where if you have a really creative name, like, for example, the Joe Rogan Experience, it's like, what the heck is that about? Well, I don't know.
Yeah.
You know, or all these people have these fancy podcast names. No, this is what it's about. The Landscaping Podcast. Yeah. What episodes are you? Give us 2, 3, 4 podcasts that just come to mind where you're like, I'm really proud of this episode. It was a really good one to listen to. Jump into that one. Obviously, the one you're doing straight after this is going to be amazing as well. You know, it's probably going to be perfect.
It probably will be a good one, actually. But yeah, there are 2 that come to mind. So one of them was Emmeline Bowman from STEM Landscape Architecture. So she's actually the one who designed that garden that beat me. So the native one garden show. So she designed that one. But the way, like, I've never given any direction to the guests about how they should speak or anything like that, because I'm just sort of, as you probably are, making things up as you go because you're not a podcaster, you just do podcasts. So I don't know what I'm doing, but the way she answered the questions, she was talking to me, but also talking to the audience at the same time. So it was just, it was so good that she was sort of talking to other people and sort of educating them about certain the way you should do things. So yeah, that's like an awesome episode, particularly for landscape designers. And then the most fun I've had on an episode was with a WA guy, Brady Skevington from Boutique Timeless Landscapes. So he's just an awesome guy. And I think that episode goes for like an hour and 15 minutes because I didn't want it to end because I was just having so much fun chatting to him.
Yeah. So that's still short for us, mate. That's still short.
No. Yeah, I listened to yours that went for like 2 hours and 30 minutes, I think. But I listened to them on 1.5 speed.
Yes, so good idea.
You've sounded a bit slow to me today, but
because you're used to my voice being so fast. Yeah, I do talk a little bit slow. You can I edit the podcast on double speed.
All right.
I put it on double speed and then listen through to it and make sure. Like on this podcast, there's nothing to edit, right? You know, except for that stuff you said about how you love Nazis and all that jazz. I'll cut that bit out. That's a joke, people. By the way, that's completely. I'm lying. All right, don't cancel it. Okay, but there's nothing to edit on this. But when I do edit, I'll listen on double speed. But yeah, that podcast, 2.5 hours. Did you get right to the end where I talked about send me a picture with a Pepsi Max?
Yeah, because I'd listened to the one after that first. So I heard you say that happened anyway.
Yes.
But yeah, I did listen to the whole one because I don't have OCD, but I can't listen to a podcast and not listen to all the way through it. I can't have one in my library that's sort of got 5 minutes left or anything like that. I'll skip through it so it's gone. But no, I did listen to yours.
So I get like...
I have listened to a lot, and you do talk about Zinger boxes a lot in them, I've noticed.
It's a joke. People jump on my Patreon and buy me a Zinger box, all right? I don't actually eat that many Zinger boxes, but sometimes I look...
I saw someone actually, it was Horizon Landscapes, he just turned 40, and I saw... He's in New South Wales, because I saw a guy who went to his birthday, and his birthday cake was a KFC bucket with chicken sticking out of it. So like it was a cake, but that looked pretty impressive.
My birthday cake is often donuts or something like that someone's just stuck candles in. I do love donuts as well. I mean, to be honest, anyways, we better wrap this up with jump on those podcasts, listen to Joel there. Joel, I had a lot of fun there, and you said to me beforehand, you were like, I'm not a very good, interesting guest, but I think you're wrong. That was quite interesting. People tell Joel how interesting he was on Instagram. And your Instagram handle is it just Joel Barnett? No, it's not, is it?
Nah, just at InStyle Gardens.
Oh, that's right. So your business, you've got the Landscaping Podcast, which is just, I'm reading it out right now, just as it's spelt, right? No, nothing fancy. And then InStyle_Gardens. And you'll find a bunch of stuff there. Support him. Buy us a Zinger box on Patreon. See you guys in the next episode.